Welcome, everyone. It is so lovely to have so many of you here with us today. Good evening to our viewers in Germany, where it's already dark and rather snowy, at least in Berlin. And good morning to our viewers in the United States. My name is Katja Griesen. I'm the Transatlantic Program Director at Aspen Institute Germany in Berlin. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to our 10th discussion, which is quite hard to believe, but already our 10th discussion in the virtual event series, State-to-State German-American State Legislator Dialogue. We are, of course, so pleased to be able to continue our collaboration with our partners, American Council on Germany, Steve, and on all of your colleagues there. It's been wonderful to work with you, and we are so grateful to have the chance to continue this platform for subnational exchange and discussions between our German-American state legislators and also a broader public. I think both of our organizations realize just how important this subnational exchange is for solving issues on both sides of the Atlantic in our states and communities and cities. So happy to be able to continue that partnership. And we're, of course, excited that we have all of you with us today. So I will keep my intro short, and I'm delighted to be able to hand it over to our moderator for the day, Steve Sokol, who is the President and CEO of the American Council on Germany, who will moderate our discussion. Steve, take it away.
Thank you, Katja. And I can just say from our side, we're also very, very pleased to be working with Aspen on this initiative. And as I was preparing for today, I also thought, wow, we've done 10 of these already. And if you think about the depth and breadth of the topics that we've addressed, it's really been a great initiative. And we've gotten great feedback from our viewers, but it's also been a wonderful way to engage legislators at the state level. And so a big thanks to your team at Aspen, to the team here at the ACG for putting this together, and of course, to the legislators themselves for participating in the discussion. And I'll come to the three guests in just a moment. But let me just start by saying that today's discussion is going to focus on digital infrastructure in both Germany and the United States. And I think it's pretty clear that in recent years, the digitalization of government services and administration has become increasingly important at the state level as a way to ensure efficient and effective delivery of services. And this has been particularly relevant, particularly the case in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, which was really an important catalyst in accelerating remote and digital access to government services. The kinds of things that have been covered by this have ranged from filing tax returns to renewing driver's licenses, but also the very important element of applying for social welfare benefits. And so today we thought we'd look at how state legislators in Germany and the United States are addressing digitalization and what steps have been taken to promote digitalization of government services. Ideally, in the course of our conversation today, we hope to share some insights on digital transformation strategies and also how best practices in one country might be able to inspire action in the other. And we want this to be interactive among our speakers, but also we want to include questions from our audience. So throughout the course of the discussion today, please feel free to post your questions in the Q&A function. It would be helpful if your question is directed to one person in particular to let me know, and I will do my best to fold those questions into the conversation. But we'd also like to give you the opportunity to ask your question live. And so if you want to raise your digital hand, I'm happy to call on you during the second half of our event today. Please keep in mind that this event will be recorded and it will be available for viewing later. So now, with no further ado, let me introduce our speakers. Their bios will be posted in the chat so you can find out more about them. And I will keep my intros short so that we have ample time to get into the substance of our discussion. In Germany, we're joined by Ellen Demuth. She's a member of the CDU, or the Christian Democratic Union, in the state parliament of Rhineland-Pfalz, or Rhineland-Palatinate, on the border with France. Ellen, herzlich willkommen. Thank you so much for joining us today. And here in the US, we have two representatives. We're joined by Representative Jennifer Parenti, who's a member of the Democratic Party in the Colorado General Assembly. And Jennifer is also an alum of our Young Leader program. And it's always wonderful to have alumni of our programs participate in these kinds of events. Thank you so much for joining us today. And last but not least, we're joined by Senator Bo Watson. He's a member of the Republican Party in the Tennessee General Assembly. Thank you as well for taking the time to be with us today. So I thought that I could maybe start by asking each of you to briefly share with us sort of your assessment of the digital infrastructure in your state and your role to shaping that digital infrastructure in your current capacity. Ellen, why don't we start with you?
Yes, of course. Yes, Steve, we can start with me. I'm wondering why I'm the only German representative, though. I was told I'm not the only one here, but well, anyway. Yes,
so,
I'm a member
so
of
let me just answer that question very briefly. You're absolutely right. There was supposed to be a state representative from the Green Party, but she unfortunately was ill and had to cancel on short notice. So, so you'll have to carry the flag for Germany today.
Right, good, I'll do my best. So now I'm a member of state parliament in Rhineland-Palatinate, and they're in the committee for media and digitalization for the last 4 years now. So we are dealing with digitalization in Rhineland-Palatinate, and my assessment to our infrastructure is we are still lacking on fiber infrastructure. On many in many communities, we do not have access to internet. There are still leaks in support infrastructure, and there's still a way to go until we can use government services and infrastructure in our government institutions, since there is no access to the internet.
Let me maybe ask a quick follow-up. Does that mean that there's really no government services provided online in Rhineland-Palatinate?
Well, maybe we can come to that during the conversation here. But of course, there is. In Germany, we have that new law. It's called Onlinezugangsgesetz in German, and online access, maybe law in English. And it says that the Bundesländer, the states, are working on government services as online driver's license, online birth certificates, and so on. But there's still no consequent infrastructure that all government levels use, and they're postponed. The law, again, it should have been in place at the end of last year, but now they found out that they just can't handle it, and it's postponed to no concrete point. So we're still waiting for it, and it's on looking at that law, you can see how hard it is for Germany to keep on track with this.
Mm-hmm. And I think, I think from my observation in the US that, this is true here as well, that there might be some, achievements in this area, but there's still a lot of work to be done to ensure that there really is better online access. Jennifer Parenti, you're nodding, so let me come to you next, and maybe you can tell us how things are in the state of Colorado in terms of sort of just the landscape when it comes to digital services and your role in trying to shape that.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. And yes, to Ms. Demuth, that sounds like a very familiar story. Here in Colorado, we have taken the digitization of government services very seriously. It started at the statewide level, obviously many years ago, but I think one of the most transformative things that we did, even back in 2017, as a bit of a skunkworks project, if you will, is we created the My Colorado app, and it was an experiment in digital IDs. This was early in the concept of digital IDs. And then, as you suggested, Stephen, the COVID pandemic really then brought to the forefront, not just for the government, but for our residents, the importance of digitization and internet access. So we have now $1 billion investment in rural broadband deployment throughout the state. Our goal is to get to 97% by 2027. We're currently at 90%, so we're doing pretty well. But that last 7%, of course, is the hardest to reach areas, our mountain communities, and some of our more remote areas, some of our tribal areas that we're still having trouble getting broadband access to. But we know it's so important because of the need to be able to access healthcare, education, government services. Even during the pandemic, we couldn't access our elected officials, right? Listen to committee meetings and so forth, unless you had good broadband access. I currently sit on the Joint Technology Committee. It's the oversight committee for the state's largest IT programs, but it also becomes a forum for discussion on general technology issues of the day, like cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, digitization, broadband deployment, etc. So we do get a lot of really interesting policy discussions that come to our committee and turn into legislation coming out of our committee. Colorado also published last year, I'm going to use a visual aid, our digital government strategic plan. And so just to show how important the state is taking this issue, and it covers issues like making sure that all of our citizens can access government services, and that also includes making sure that they're accessible to all of our citizens, including people with disabilities, people who speak other languages. And so that's always part of our digitization effort as well. There.
Let me maybe ask one quick follow-up, since and undoubtedly we'll get into this in our conversation, but particularly this recognition that the pandemic sort of increased people's awareness in the need for greater digitalization. Here in New York, and certainly when I was traveling in Germany, the fact that there were so many apps that you could have that could show that you had a valid vaccination, or that you had tested negatively, I think really made this very tangible for a lot of people, right? On your device, in your hand, you can show who you are and that you've been vaccinated. And I would think that would serve as sort of a positive catalyst in terms of moving things forward. But really the issues that both you and Ellen Demuth have talked about lacking access in certain parts of the state in each of your cases, this means that we really need more of an investment in the fundamental infrastructure, right? Laying fiber and having that access. Do you feel that there's a real motivation to do that now? Is that one of the pillars, I guess, of the government's strategic plan?
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. And just as an example, I think you're right. The digital vaccination card was the second thing that went into our My Colorado app. Now you can access your vehicle registrations, your titles, your parks and wildlife passes, your hunting licenses. I mean, there's a lot of information that has been added to this, features that have been added since the pandemic. But I would also want to take an opportunity to highlight that we also have to be careful in the increased digitization of our services, that we don't over-rely on the digitization of services, that there will always be circumstances and segments of our population who cannot get the help that they need online. And we have to make sure that we continue to have in-person, local access to various government offices. Think of our houseless population that may not have a cell phone, or people whose phones just got cut off. They need to be able to access their government services as well.
And certainly one of the things that I wanted to ask a little bit later is just the generational shift, right? I mean, I'm thinking also about people who are in an older demographic who might not feel as comfortable online and would rather actually go to an office and take care of some of these things. Bo Watson, you're smiling, so let's come to you and hear what the situation in Tennessee is like.
Well, I guess I'm the older demographic. that is adapting. I predate cell phones. I was around when the first mass production of microwaves became available, so I guess I'm part of that group that is having to adapt. And obviously, what we're doing today is a demonstration of the some of the effects of the pandemic, where people have gotten much more comfortable in digital conversations that are video produced. Tennessee is not any different than really what's going on in Colorado. We all took advantage of some federal funding in order to expand broadband, but broadband is one delivery method. There are other delivery methods that can be utilized as well. All of the states in the United States are looking at ways to increase citizen access to both government functions as well as to the legislative process, administrative processes of government. I think all of the states, Tennessee included, are looking at developing different types of mobile apps that they use for, in Tennessee, we have My Tennessee app, which is where we are trying to, consolidate all of the various data points that the state has so that a user can easily access the information. I think a couple of challenges that we have faced that I'm sure is similar or the same for my colleagues is, one, many states have very antiquated systems, and part of pushing the information out to the public is having a support system that actually has the capacity to do that. So many of us have been having to invest in new systems to really just aggregate the data before we even start pushing it out. So that's been a challenge that we have. And then the amount of data and the interconnectability of the data. One of the biggest challenges that we've seen, and I sit on our Information Systems Council in Tennessee, and one of the biggest challenges is you have over time systems that the Department of Human Services has developed, and it doesn't necessarily communicate with the Department of Children's Services. Mm-hmm. And for someone like me who doesn't really understand how all that works, I simply say, well, we ought to merge those data systems together so that the public can have access to it. Well, then it's not that easy. And besides just privacy issues and all other kinds of issues that go with it, just the massive amount of data that we're talking about becomes really, really difficult. And then we have found in Tennessee, and I'd be interested if my friends from Germany as well as Colorado, is oftentimes computer vendors come in or systems vendors come in to do a project for us, and they find out the project is far bigger than they thought they could do. And we end up kind of reinventing the wheel 2 or 3 times. The last thing I'll say is that while we are constantly trying to create platforms where the public can access the activities and actions of government, we also have become more and more and more and more sensitive to the cybersecurity issue that Representative Parenti referenced. Probably to the degree that I would bet her state, like my state, is probably talking as much or more about cybersecurity than they are necessarily about new platforms or pushing new things out to the public, because all of our states, and I'm sure my friend in Germany is experiencing the same thing, are under constant attack by outsiders trying to either access the data or take hostage of the data and then hold the state prisoner to that. So now we've pivoted to a whole new realm of cybersecurity. But Tennessee, Colorado, all 50 states in the United States are all pushing heavily towards more broadband. And someone in the question queue, said, well, you don't have to have fiber in order to access the information. And that's true. But the gold standard is, fiber. And if you want all your citizens as best you can to be on an equal playing field, then you want to get that level of access to everybody. So fiber to the home is kind of the gold standard that all the states are trying to push for. Mm-hmm. And let me say to Ellen in Germany, just your North American Volkswagen manufacturing plant is located in the 11th Senate District here in Hamilton County, Tennessee. So I'll say hi to you from your friends here in the States.
Well, and it's always great to have those kinds of real connections and threads, right? As we were saying before we went live today, there is more to the bilateral relationship between Germany and the United States than what happens between capital cities. And it's that subnational level, the people-to-people exchanges, but also the business exchanges that are so important. Bo Watson, I want to thank you for raising that question that was brought up in the chat, because indeed one of our viewers did question why fiber is necessary for government services, and whether there aren't other tools that can be used, like 4G and 5G coverage for most administrative processes. You started to answer that by saying that fiber is sort of the gold standard of that technology, and that's incredibly important. But the viewer also went on to say that local town halls or city halls could provide Wi-Fi for their citizens. But I would sort of argue that during the pandemic, we saw a lot of people who did not have Wi-Fi at home having to drive to the local school or library and sit in their cars so that their kids could access the internet so that they could participate in school. That can't be the solution, right? For any of us. Jennifer, you're nodding, so I'm guessing that you might have something to say, and then I'd love to bring Ellen back into the conversation.
Yeah, and this is something we're certainly struggling with our rural broadband deployment. The truth is that, well, if you live in a state with 14,000-foot mountains, you realize that cell phones don't work everywhere. And a lot of people in our state live in places where cell phones don't work in their homes. And so, yes, it's a great tool to have to be able to use all of these things from our mobile phones, but we also need to ensure that we've got more reliable service going into people's homes. And I would also agree, into community centers and town halls and schools and other places, libraries, other places where people can publicly access this information. Again, it's really about an equity and accessibility issue. Yes to cell phones, but have it be a yes and instead of a yes, or. Yeah, I'll pause there so the others can speak.
Yeah, Ellen, is there anything that you'd like to add to this conversation?
Yes, it's the same here. We are a very rural state, and we have many farms and wineries that are far behind mountains or in the woods, and cell phones don't work there. And therefore, it's really crucial that they have broadband to their homes and fiber. And we very much rely on carriers, on private carriers, like the telecom. You have them in the US as well. And it depends on their interest to make money, where they build new fiber and where they wait or just are not interested at the moment. And therefore, we as a state and government have to put a bit pressure on them that we choose agreements with them so that all people in our state get broadband and fiber. And that's a challenge at the moment, since, of course, that's all about how much state money is negotiated with them to get fiber to every single home in our state.
Yeah, and
some that's of it, a big opportunity that makes our state attractive for the future. If we don't do that, people will move away to the cities, and of course there will be no life there anymore.
And some of it,
no farming, no produced food, no wineries.
Yeah, and some of it, Stephen, is public expectation. I mean, in the United States, the expectation is that people will have fiber, and even though wireless is making incredible advances, satellite technology is making incredible, and we're seeing advances, and who knows where we're going to be in 5 years. I mean, again, 10 years ago, who would imagine we'd be having this conversation on an iPad or whatever other people on. So, but the expectations of people in Tennessee, and I think the expectations of people in Colorado, is that, as Representative Parenti referenced, the equality of the systems, that everybody has the same electrical line that comes to their home, and they have the same access to the power grid that the other person has. And so with this information, you want to create that same kind of environment where, regardless of your status in life, this is a public utility that is part public, part private, which is some of the struggle that we have with it. But it is accessible to all Americans, or in my case, all Tennesseans. And to Representative Demuth, Tennessee is probably very similar in nature. We have to where you represent. We have a very mountainous area, and we have very rural parts, and the private providers can't make the math work when they've got to run fiber 5 miles down the street to one home at the very end of that street. Mm-hmm. But yet that citizen can't understand why that company won't run the fiber down that street. So we have those same struggles. I love these kind of conversations because some of the challenges that we have in Tennessee or in Colorado or in the United States, they're kind of universal, and we're all kind of wrestling with it. The last thing I'll say, Stephen, is that one of the things that I think we're all experiencing is, since even people in Germany are working at this same broadband distribution, the capacity of the system to supply the necessary materials for this is also a challenge, because there's only so much fiber in the world that produced at any one time. And when everybody's wanting it, it's driven the price up for everyone. And it's also created capacity challenges where there's just not fiber available as quickly and as fast as we'd like to deploy it, even if we have the money to deploy it.
Yeah, and that's actually something that I wanted to come back to, because earlier you, Bo Watson, had talked about how many states have antiquated systems, right? And so one of the challenges is, how does one update the system, but how does one also update the necessary infrastructure and make sure that it's state of the art? And on the one hand, you've got tremendous technological advances in the field. So how do you make sure that you're sort of investing in the right technology just because it's the technology that's available now, rather than waiting for maybe the next best thing? And that happened. We did have a question from one of our viewers who was asking a little bit about how you sort of slow down the changes in digitalization, including access and the devices that citizens need. And you had written, you don't want to slow that down, right? You always want to be using whatever is state of the art. But how do you do that when technology is changing so fast?
Well, if I had that, maybe Representative Parenti will have the answer to that question. But I think, people often think that government is like at the very front cutting edge of all this stuff. And oftentimes government is lagging farther behind than the average citizen mm-hmm. does. I mean, look, people, and I'll say of my generation, have now gotten very comfortable with ordering their groceries off of their cell phone and ordering food off of their cell phone and we now have, first of all, when we first had in the United States, when we first had self-service gasoline stations, everybody thought we were going to blow the world up because surely I didn't have the skill set to put gas in my car. Well, now look at, virtually everything is self-service. You can, Representative Parenti was talking about getting your driver's license and all these things that states function, but the private sector is really, if we look at what the private sector is doing, the government side of the equation can learn from that and try to figure out, okay, where is the private sector in this? Because they're looking at the most advanced technologies. Is that the technology we adopt, or do we see something that's coming in the future that the private sector mm-hmm. is looking as well? So we learn from our partners in the private sectors about a lot of that. And I'll yield to Representative Parenti because I know she had something to say about it.
No, thank you. And those were great points. I can't tell you how many times I leave my house now with just my car keys and my phone. That's it. Right? It's got my driver's license, it's got my banking cards, and then I get to a store that doesn't have Apple Pay or whatever, and I get annoyed. But no, I was just going to say, 20 years ago, when I was overseeing software programs in the Air Force, we were on an 18-month development cycle for software, and that was 20 years ago. I can only imagine that it's faster paced now. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that to slow down would be to our detriment. What we have to do is ensure that we're at least keeping pace, and hopefully, as the senator said, try to get in front of this, because our government services generally are always behind. I know in Colorado, we're running software programs in a number of our executive departments that are, 20, 25 years old, written in software programs that are no longer valid, right? No longer being supported. And we're desperately trying to upgrade those at significant cost. And
Representative Parenti, that's a really funny point that you make, because we have systems now that we don't have people who even understand that computer language. They don't even know what the system does.
Right.
Yeah. And Ellen Demuth, I'm assuming it's similar in Germany, right? With some very old programs that are in operation.
Yes, it's a similar picture, but a bit different, since you are far ahead in the US of us in Germany regarding private services that you can use. There is no coming back to state services. I don't have a digital driver's license. We just don't have them over here. I still have my hard card I have to take with me when I go out. I wish we had a digital one. It will make life much easier. But then to your initiatives on private sites, like, for instance, shopping in a shop where there's no shop assistant present anymore. We don't have these kind of shops in Germany, or just maybe some flagship ones, but count them 5 in the whole country, or so in Berlin and Munich maybe, and only one of them. But we're not that far down the road yet. And it's really interesting for us to look into the US and see how far developed you are, and learn from you.
So I'd like
I'll make you feel okay, Representative Demuth. Tennessee, we have the capability, but we have yet to start using some of the digital identification that they may be using in Colorado. The 50 states here, we all jealously guard our differences from each other. And so, some states are moving ahead. And I'm sure you do this as well, but we learn from our colleagues in other states. Like Tennessee is often a state that, watches what, for example, Colorado is doing. A perfect example that has nothing to do with digitalization, but we're looking at, like, Colorado was really out in front in the United States on various marijuana laws and that kind of stuff. And so a state like Tennessee is watching, how does that play out in Colorado? So in the same vein, we watch Colorado, how is some of their advanced digitalization working out, and what can we learn from both their good experiences and from their bad experiences, so that we don't replicate that. So, it's funny. I was at a dinner last night, and the person I was with wanted to pay their check with Apple Pay, and the restaurant we were at said, "Well, we don't do Apple Pay." So I ended up having to pay for my meal and their meal too. So we're not quite where Colorado is on some of that stuff as well.
Well, I think everywhere we're seeing.
When you look at Germany.
Go ahead.
Yeah, when you would do a survey in Germany, what's our favorite paying method? You would still come to cash. Like, a lot of people only trust cash, and there is still ongoing discussion in Germany if we can reduce our cash payment systems out of security issues. And there's still a high majority in population that wants still to pay in cash everywhere they go. There is no culture yet only to pay by card. Only young people.
Stephen, I mean, the other side of this equation that people need to understand is there's a trust factor too, because so there's a fairly large movement particularly in Tennessee. I don't know about Colorado's experience or Germany's experience, they can share, but a lot of people, they don't trust electronic voting. They believe, they want to see a paper ballot. They want to, hand count everything. They believe that digital systems can be manipulated, and there can be ways of manipulating information or manipulating financial information. Mm-hmm. And so they want to see hard copies. So, in the old days, I guess we would call those Luddites, but there's still these folks who are, still believe that there ought to be an alternative to a digital system. And many of us are kind of in that transition stage where we've got these paper systems that we would like to digitize, but as a government entity, you've got to maintain that pathway for those individual citizens who choose another way. Even though it may be less efficient, may be more costly, you do have a certain part of our population that sort of rejects the whole digitalization as a manipulative means that both government and the private sector could utilize to their own advantage.
Well, sorry, go ahead, Jennifer.
No, I just wanted to echo that. I would agree, echoing back to my previous comments, that anything we do in terms of government digitization cannot replace other means of people accessing the services that we provide. It's got to be an and not an instead of.
So let's maybe go a little deeper here, because I'd love to sort of explore the trust factor a little bit more, if you will. Because one of the questions that I had coming into this was, what are the concerns that citizens in each of your states might have about the use of personal data, and whether that's maybe one of the hurdles why there might be a reluctance to engage. But particularly since the two Americans talked about the focus on security issues, cybersecurity issues, when it comes to any work that's related to digitalization in each of your states. There's a whole slew of security threats. Bo Watson, you were talking about attacks on systems, and I know that that's certainly a concern at the state level as well. Let's maybe do this in two lines of conversation. One is, can any of you talk about sort of the personal data aspect of this, and whether that really is something that people are reluctant to talk about? And then the other is, I guess, sort of what sort of safeguards are in place to try to instill more confidence in people that it's actually safe to engage in some of these digital services. I don't know who wants to go first.
Well, I mean, I'll jump in, and then the others will be a lot smarter about it than I am. But I mean, to some degree, again, I say in the private sector, to some degree, technology, digitalization is being embedded into people's lives, and whether people like it or they don't like it is becomes irrelevant, because once business gets into this is how we're going to do business, then that's just how they have to be. Now, government's a different animal from that, but people will, as we've learned with the pandemic, now we're all very comfortable having these kind of meetings online. So some of it is just organically. As you referenced very early in the conversation, folks in my generation are tend to be a little less trustworthy of these technologies. But if you're born in this age and this is what you have known your entire existence, your fear of it is much less. If we look at the social media space, younger individuals' willingness to share personal information that in my generation would never share, is they're much more comfortable with it. But trying to protect critical personal information is a big challenge, whether you're in the private sector or you're in the government sector. We all know, we read news reports every day of some data breach that occurred, that some information of some person got out, or a group of people, and now they want $4 million, $50 million to release it. So that's kind of we're having to learn to live with that. But the cyber technology space is it's developing at the same speed, or it's trying to develop the same speed as new systems are being developed. But a lot of it is just what you are raised with. And I think as young people are raised with technology, their level of confidence is much greater than those of us that are used to other and older systems.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes a lot of sense. Jennifer, do you want to weigh in as well?
No, I'm happy to speak. I was going to see if Ellen wanted to hop in, but Colorado's got a relatively younger population. We're attracting young professionals from all over the state here. We have a pretty highly educated population and a very strong tech sector. And so I think, although there are certainly some people in our state who fear technology and are concerned about it, I think most of the residents of our state would say that they're comfortable with technology. I think you would get a few more who are distrustful of government in general. We do have a strong Western libertarian streak here. But I think where we're seeing more challenges is not necessarily, obviously we all want to protect data privacy. And so protecting data, protecting citizens' data is certainly something that we talk about often in the technology committee and, you know, amongst the different departments, but also how can we better share data in the interests of improving government services when data privacy laws are in place that prevent that kind of data sharing. And so that's been like an interesting piece that we're trying to unravel. So for instance, you know, an idea came up recently of, well, when I complete my online tax return, right, from the Department of Revenue, wouldn't it be great if based on the things that I put in, like the number of kids that I have and my income, it told me what services I might be eligible for. Hey, did you know that you're eligible for, you know, reduced childcare or this kind of tax credit or what have you? Tax credit probably it would flag, but or these types of SNAP benefits.
Yeah.
But laws within the Department of Revenue of sharing tax information prevent that kind of interaction between our departments. And those laws are good. We want to protect people's tax information, obviously, but how can we maybe more in a more nuanced way look at how we could share information to the benefit of our population and make it easier for them to even find out about the programs and services that might be available to them. So that's something we've been thinking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ellen Demuth would probably say that there is a very similar tension in Germany between trying to be, you know, efficient with the information that one has, with the data that one has, certainly wanting to protect it. And this is something that plays out in society. Of course, Europe has its GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which is in place as well, which has very rigid rules about how data is used. But Ellen, from your perspective in Germany, how are you addressing this trust issue?
Yeah, we have indeed a similar discussion, Stephen. For instance, when it comes to health information about your therapies, your illnesses, how often you used which doctor, etc., we have a discussion that we want to gather this information on a health card for each patient, and then every doctor you go to can access your health card and see what kind of therapy you got so far and can help you most efficient for a benefit, as we think. Although, of course, there is a discussion of if your data can be abused to the wrong people and get into the wrong hands. And it's an ongoing discussion, since there are always experts that find evidence that data can be abused, and on the other side there are doctors and politicians that want to gather this information to have benefits for the whole population, and we are still in this conflict, and it's somehow hard to solve. It's ongoing for a few years now, and we still have not established, for instance, this health card. And as Jennifer said, we discussed this for many other fields too, as for services for families and so on. But still, there is always, in Germany, we are internationally known for our, how would you say, our always worries about what can go wrong. Like, we are always overthinking everything. So this is a big point for us.
Well, but I think that there are some very big concerns here that need to be considered carefully. You know, in the course of our conversation, we've talked a little bit about public-private partnerships and how they might be useful or impactful here. According to a survey that was conducted by Salesforce, some 60% of customers believe that governments need to modernize how they deliver services. And it seems like collaboration between policymakers, companies, communities, and the private sector, but also other stakeholders, are essential in making that happen. And I'm curious whether in each of your states there are any examples of successful collaborative partnerships or efforts that you could share with us or something that's being worked on that is worthy of discussion when it comes to bringing together these various actors to try to address the common challenges that we face. Having said that, government spending cannot be the only answer, right? I mean, that it can't be that the government is paying for that fiber, for that, last street. There's got to be a different model.
Well, I think at least in Tennessee, Tennesseans would prefer that government not be the primary source. That's typically true of, I think, most Americans, that government is not the primary source. The government utilizes the private sector. So Tennessee, probably in the United States, Tennessee in the southeastern United States is most well known for the Tennessee Valley Authority, which was a collaborative effort between the United States government and private energy vendors to deliver energy to the southeastern states in the 1930s. So we're kind of very familiar with this model. Our delivery system for digital technology is partnering with, the state provides, or through either the federal government through grants or the state through grants, provides a grants process by which the private sector bids for those grants, but then it's the private sector that goes out and actually does the work and lays the fiber and buys the fiber and does all that kind of stuff. So I think, within this digital space, there is a lot of collaborative work that is occurring. The biggest challenge that I think those of us on the government side, and I think both of my colleagues referenced this, is in those most least populated areas, or those areas where the topography is so challenging, it is difficult to get the private sector to deliver the digital product in that, if it's fiber, in that space, because in our capital system here, there's just not a margin for them. And so that's the space where government the hand of government may be more involved than in the more urban, densely populated areas where it financially makes sense. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, and this, I don't know, I'd be interested if this is true in Colorado. Tennessee has really sort of portioned off the different regions of the state to where different private providers have, monopoly is not the right word, but different private providers have control over various regions of the state that have been identified as their service area. And in an effort to try and develop the network in those areas, competitors are excluded from coming into that service area. So we've created these distinct service areas so that they can, at least for a short term, they can see a return on their investment without the threat of competition. I don't know, y'all doing that? Y'all have that kind of setup in Colorado, Representative Parenti?
To the extent that we outsource, our infrastructure programs and so forth, yes. I mean, we're hardly doing any of that in-house. Most of our major IT development is done through contracts. Our fiber laying is done through contracts. Our Department of Transportation actually has primary responsibility for fiber laying because it coincides with our state highway system so significantly. But I think in Colorado, I would highlight two other efforts that we're working on in terms of public and private partnerships. The first is our Digital Government Services Team, Colorado Digital Services Team. It's modeled after the U.S. program of the same name. And this is a public-private partnership that we've had going for a few years now, where we can attract top talent from the private sector and bring them in to work in our government departments as consultants, advisors on 1-year kind of limited contract bases. And the private sector treats these as sabbaticals, so the people can return back to their private sector jobs with Google or Amazon or Apple or whoever they're working for when their sabbatical year with Colorado is done. And what this has allowed is for some really top-notch, I would say, tied-in talent to come and be inside our departments as we're doing things like the major overhaul of our Colorado HR system or the major overhaul of our Department of Corrections record systems, and be there to advise on the best way forward in the digitization and movement to a cloud-based, format for a lot of these programs. And the other thing I would highlight is in the area of cybersecurity. Because of where we are and who we host here in the state of Colorado, including Space Command and all of the defense military contracts that come around that, we have a really robust cybersecurity community. And we have developed a number of partnerships within that community that are both public, private, and then I think Ellen commented earlier about ensuring that all levels of government are on board. And so we've got our Cybersecurity Advisory Committee that includes members of the Governor's Office of Information Technology and our Chief Security Information Officer, but also includes our National Guard and school districts and county commissioners and city council members and fire district members, water district members, right? All meeting together once a month to talk about multi-level cybersecurity across the spectrum of government services. And so, and that also, we also have, for instance, the National Cybersecurity Center, which is actually a nonprofit organization housed here in Colorado that's promoting public-private partnerships and conversations in the cyber security network. And so I think that that is a really good model that we're very proud of here in Colorado. Includes federal, state, local governments, private, nonprofit groups coming together around an issue that, as the senator said earlier, is so important to all of us.
Thank you. So let's go back to Germany and to Ellen. Are there some good examples of public-private partnerships in Rhineland-Pfalz that you can draw on?
Good question. Not really. At least they don't come to my mind now. As I said earlier, we are relying on public providers like the telecom or private providers, as you will, for the infrastructure. And of course, we have advisory services for our population. They can call an agency and they help them to organize contacts to the providers. And on a municipal community level, we have initiatives run by the population itself or the people themselves to organize more infrastructure. But apart from that, I'm not sure we have good public-private examples here.
Let me maybe, our time. No, go ahead.
Cybersecurity is very federal organized in Germany. We have many levels working together on that. As Jennifer said, in the US, it's kind of a bit more tricky in Germany. We have the state level in Berlin, and then we have all the states, the 16 states that organize it themselves. And there are problems in communicating with each other on it. So it should be more organized and more working together to focus on really cybersecurity issues that come in. Sometimes they're a bit on their own with the cybersecurity issues, as I can say.
Thank you. I mean, as our time sort of starts to come to an end, I wanted to bring up another subject that we've talked about a little bit, but that's sort of the user comfort, if you will, on both sides. One question I would have for all of you is, to what degree are you finding employees at the state level are sort of embracing the new technologies and the new services that are now being provided digitally? What sort of training is necessary for that? What sort of reskilling is necessary for that? And are there sort of programs in place to try to facilitate that, to make sure that at the back end, you've got qualified people doing what they need to do to make sure that the systems actually work and that the services actually work?
Stephen, that's a really interesting question. I can't speak broadly to the thousands of employees of the state of Colorado. But I can tell you that this is playing out right now in our legislature, where we are trying to push ourselves out of a paper-based legislative concept. And so instead of printing out, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages of bills and amendments and throwing them on people's desks in the middle of House sessions, moving towards more digital provision of those. And so to that extent, all the legislators now have iPads where theoretically amendments and bills as they're introduced get placed into, we use box folders, that we can access and look at online. But that's definitely that is a transition in process. And we are dealing with this very issue of training, for our legislators and making those systems as easy to use as possible. But there's so many wonderful opportunities there, either again, just from a legislative perspective of what if we could get to the point where we could see a proposed amendment in line with the bill that's being introduced and see how that amendment looks in context of the rest of the bill on the fly, on the moment. That would be amazing, right? We're not there yet, but we're moving towards that now. And certainly there's a training and there's a privacy and security aspect to all of that we are also struggling with. But no, it's an interesting and relevant conversation.
Ellen, you were smiling and nodding. Can you imagine a paperless Landtag?
We are working on it as well, but we are focusing the same problems Jennifer described. It's hard, it needs a lot of training and a lot of wishful pushing everyone in the same direction. So, we are generations that come from using paper at school, writing everything down on paper, and it needs time to develop. It is to digitalization only attempts, but we're working on it.
Well, Tennessee, we're not any different. I mean, we're doing all the same things, but again, some of this, when you ask about state employees, how do they embrace? It's been my experience that again, I can't speak, as Jennifer pointed out, I can't speak to a single individual, but in general, the state embrace systems that make their job easier or better, right? But where the frustration lies is when you are beginning to embed that system and you're abandoning the legacy system and moving to the new system, and the frustrations that occur in the transfer from one system to another. Just this week, I had a meeting we're transferring this to this new system that does HR and payroll for the folks who are in what is called our Choices program, which is primarily the disability community. And we've transitioned to a new vendor, and the struggles of the system does all the same functions, but the screens look different. The way the functions work look different. And so people have a lot of frustration with that, but they appreciate the simplicity that it creates for them. Again, some of this is organic. If you have grown up using your cell phone or using your information device, I don't think we really call them phones anymore, you're using your device,
right? You're
going to be very comfortable with any kind of technology system that comes to you. So I think some of it just happens organically. I did want to say one thing to Ellen, just so she knows that there are municipalities in Tennessee, and I'm sure it maybe in Colorado as well, that they are in the broadband space as well. They will, their utility system, which is a governmental entity, they'll spin off a company that will do fiber and will do video streaming and stuff, and they're quasi-governmental entities. So it's not just the private sector that is doing all the heavy lifting around this. There are municipalities or governmental entities that play in the space as well. So we're not all privately driven.
Maybe as we come to a close, I'd like to sort of turn it around. I mean, Bo, you were talking a little bit about the frustration by some government workers when there's a change in a system. I think, all of us have experienced that when we've gotten a new cell phone or even a new television set, and all of a sudden felt like, wait a minute, the old system worked and the new one I'm having a hard time figuring out. But since it's come up, and since Jennifer's talked about, some people who are maybe not able to take advantage of online services. We've also talked about the fact that some people are overwhelmed by digital services. How are your states working to increase sort of user comfort on the other side? Are there any efforts in place to try to make people feel a little bit more comfortable with taking advantage of these government services online rather than in person?
I certainly have seen a bit of advertising around some of the systems. I think that's important. I know that, for instance, even just in my local town, when they created an app to access requests for public services, like please fix my pothole, and did you notice that this sign has fallen over, and those kinds of things. Those notifications of new features, new updates go out on our town water bill, right? And I think even those little messages do help with familiarity, because the more that we just hear about something and see something in action, the more comfortable that we get with it. I can't say that we've done a lot. Well, I just can't say. I can't say that we didn't. I just can't say if we've done a lot on the user side, but I will just emphasize how important accessibility is. And for us, that means language accessibility. It means accessibility for our disabled communities, our homeless communities, those of us without access to, good broadband services, and that's got to be a priority as we move forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. What about in Tennessee?
Oh, I guess I would just say ditto. I mean, I think, most of these systems that are developed by vendors that go out, they create some internal comment system or some internal survey system that allows for some public feedback. 2 stars, 3 stars, 5 stars, whatever that system might be. I think we utilize some of those, at least the vendors who create some of these products for state government, utilize some of those so they can continue to try and enhance the consumer or the citizens' experience. And I think, just like the private sector does, I think these same companies do that with their systems so that they can, because, the states are holding these vendors accountable for helping us produce a good product that citizens can use. And so in my time on the Information Systems Council, I've seen a number of modifications that we've made to programs because the community feedback was it's too difficult, the icon doesn't make sense, the screen doesn't really work on my phone, those kind of things. So I think we're, like the private sector, using those same kind of tools.
Thank you. And last but not least, Ellen, in Germany, any thoughts on how to sort of instill confidence in people in taking advantage of the limited digital services that are available?
Yeah, it starts at school, I'd say. Our students are now educated to use their mobile tools and devices, and we grow into it generation by generation. It's really hard to convince grown-up generations to participate in it, since we still are discussing, for instance, voting digitally, and it's out of our history in Germany, it will never reach, I'd say, we will not live up to the point where we reach online voting in Germany. It's just not, they're not trusting it. And it's a good example for how we think here. So it will take generations to grow out of doing everything by hands and haptically, and to digitalize everything, and just will take a bit of time, but we will finally get there.
Well, Ellen, I'd really like to thank you for bringing in the issue of education just at the tail end of our conversation, because I think the whole notion of digital literacy is so important related to all of this on both sides, and so that education piece is very, very important. Well, on behalf of Aspen Germany and the American Council on Germany, I just want to thank all three of you for this incredibly thoughtful and thought-provoking conversation. As I think about some takeaways, it seems to me that, and this is nothing new, but digitalization at the state level is really a work in progress. We've seen some progress in the US, perhaps more so than in some parts of Germany, but there is a lot to do on multiple fronts, and it starts with that general physical infrastructure, but then also continues to what kinds of services are actually provided and who's using them, and how do you make sure that the service providers and the users are comfortable with that new format and that way of doing things without taking anything away from those who still like the old way of doing things. But it seems as if digitalization really is a necessity. And I think that was true before the pandemic, but certainly the pandemic showed us all just how important it is to have this as an option as well. So obviously a lot to do, and certainly a topic that is worth following in the future. But I want to thank each of you for sharing your insights, and for the work that you do at the state level to try to move the process forward. So with that, many thanks to you. Thanks to our viewers for tuning in today and for some great questions. And also, of course, thanks to the team at Aspen Germany and here at the ACG for putting this and 9 other state-to-state legislative discussions together. Many, many thanks.